They were built, they existed, and then nothing. No one knows where they went, who made the call, or why they were wiped from the map. These 12 American cars are wrapped in mystery, lost to time, and shrouded in questions no one can answer. Were they too powerful, too strange, or part of something bigger? One thing's for sure, you've never seen anything like this. The 1907 Pontiac Can-Am stands as one of the most fascinating and short-lived relics of the late muscle car era, a one-year-only experiment that combined big performance, striking styling, and a unique mix of parts cribbed from Pontiac's performance stable. Created in a time when emissions regulations, insurance surcharges, and changing tastes were smothering Detroit's once dominant muscle car scene, the Can-Am was a rare attempt to inject some fire back into the brand's intermediate lineup. And for a brief moment, it worked. But then, like a flash in the pan, it disappeared. Its production cut short not by poor sales or lack of interest, but by a bizarre parts supply issue that killed the program in its infancy. At its core, the Can-Am was based on the 1977 Pontiac Le Mans Sport Coupe, a respectable mid-size car that wasn't setting the world on fire. But Pontiac's performance engineers weren't ready to let the muscle car die just yet. They took the bones of the Le Mans, added the rally-bred suspension from the Firebird formula, gave it a shaker hood scoop pulled straight from the Trans Am, and bolted in the L78 6.6L 400 cubic inch V8, making 200 horsepower and 325 buffs of torque. Decent numbers for the post-1974 smog era. California-bound cars got the 403 Oldsmobile V8 instead, thanks to emissions restrictions. It wasn't GTO-level power, but for 1907, it was about as good as you could get in a mid-size American car. The Can-Am was all about attitude. The body got a wild, NASCAR-inspired makeover, complete with a scooped hood, blacked-out grille, color-matched Rally 2 wheels, a ducktail rear spoiler, and distinctive white paint with bold orange, red, and yellow stripes running down the sides. Pontiac's signature war paint. The shaker hood scoop wore the words TA 6.6, making it clear where the car drew its spirit. Inside, the Can-Am featured bucket seats, a rally gauge cluster, and performance touches more in line with a Firebird than a Le Mans. It wasn't subtle, but that was the point. This was a muscle car dressed in disco-era skin, screaming against the dying light of the performance golden age. Pontiac's dealers were caught off guard by how much interest the Can-Am generated. Enthusiasts wanted something unique, something with muscle car DNA. And the Can-Am hit that nostalgic sweet spot. Orders began pouring in. Pontiac initially planned to build 5,000 of them, perhaps more if demand held steady. But fate had other plans. Just a few months into production, the mold used to create the car's distinctive rear spoiler broke. It wasn't a cheap, simple fix. And with the Can-Am being a limited-run car produced with assistance from Motortown, a Detroit specialty shop, Pontiac's upper management decided it wasn't worth the cost and hassle to repair the mold or retool for more spoilers. Just like that, the Can-Am was dead. Final production totaled around 1,377 units, making it one of the rarest Pontiacs of the decade. That abrupt end left a lot of people scratching their heads. The car had received positive press, dealer enthusiasm was strong, and customers were still asking for them. But Pontiac quietly swept it under the rug. No official replacement PM. The Can-Am never returned for 1978. It was as if Pontiac wanted to pretend it had never existed. Today, the Can-Am is a cult classic, an obscure and fascinating footnote in Pontiac history. It lives in the shadow of better-known muscle machines like the GTO and Trans Am, but for many collectors, that's exactly what makes it special. It was a car that never got the chance to be overexposed. If you see one at a show today, odds are the owner will be bombarded with the same questions. What is that? Is it real? Why haven't I heard of this before? One former owner remembered it vividly. I bought it brand new in '77. It looked like a race car straight off the track. It had the sound, the scoop, the stance. I remember parking it next to a Monte Carlo and a Cutlass and feeling like I was in a different league. But people didn't get it. They thought it was some custom job, A year later, I went back to the same dealer and asked about them. The salesman said, "We can't get them anymore. Pontiac killed it." Because of its rarity and distinctive look, the Can-Am has slowly gained value among muscle car enthusiasts. Restored examples are few and far between, and many were lost to rust, neglect, or were simply used up and discarded. But those that survive serve as a reminder of what Pontiac could do, even at the tail end of the muscle car era, when the company put its heart into building something special. It may have been too little, too late, but for the lucky few who got their hands on one, the Can-Am was proof that muscle wasn't entirely dead. It just needed a shaker hood and a little defiance. The 1962 Ford Fairlane is one of those rare vehicles that played a quietly crucial role in shaping the future of American performance engineering. Yet it barely registers in the memory of most enthusiasts today. Sandwiched awkwardly between the compact Falcon and the full-size Galaxy, the early Fairlane was a car without a clear identity, misunderstood by buyers, and overlooked by collectors. But hidden beneath its modest body was the debut of something that would go on to define Ford performance for decades: the lightweight 221 cubic inch small block V8. This engine was the first in what would become one of the most important American engine families, the Windsor series, and it all started in a car almost nobody talks about. The timing of the 1962 Fairlane's release says everything about its historical obscurity. America was still in love with chrome-laden land yachts, and the compact car revolution, though gaining steam, hadn't yet reached the mainstream muscle market. Buyers either wanted the economy and familiarity of the Falcon or the prestige and power of a Galaxy 500. Into this divide, Ford introduced the Fairlane, a mid-size car that wasn't compact enough to be thrifty or large enough to be imposing. Its styling was restrained, conservative even, with crisp horizontal lines, minimal chrome, and a clean front fascia. It had none of the jet-age exuberance of its bigger siblings or the youthful spirit of the soon-to-arrive Mustang. It was, quite simply, practical. And in 1962, practical didn't sell cars, it sold appliances. But under the hood, Ford was quietly lighting the fuse on its next generation of performance. The brand new 221 cubic inch small block V8 was a marvel of modern engineering, especially for a domestic automaker still shedding the vestiges of the flathead era. Weighing in at just 470 pounds thanks to thin wall casting technology, the engine was compact, durable, and easy to work on. It produced 145 horsepower and 216 lb-ft of torque. Not eye-watering numbers, but its smooth power band and mechanical refinement then hinted at something more. And it was only the beginning. That 221 would evolve rapidly. The very next year, Ford introduced the 260 V8. Then came the 289, which found fame in the Mustang and Shelby Cobra. By the late 60s, the 302 was born, and that engine would power everything from Broncos to F-150s to performance icons well into the 1990s. Yet it all began here in the plain 1962 Fairlane, a car that didn't even get carpet in some configurations. Old-school mechanics and hot rodders who remember the 221 speak of it with surprising affection. One retired Ford technician recalled, "That engine was tight from the factory. You could feel it was overbuilt. When we started boring them out and swapping heads later on, they really woke up. But even stock, it had a sound, a smoothness you didn't get in the old Y blocks." Still, the car itself never caught the public's imagination. The automotive press gave it polite, but not glowing reviews. Buyers weren't sure what to make of it. It was a car caught in the crossfire between eras. Ford themselves didn't help. The marketing push for the Fairlane was minimal, and it was rarely seen in the kinds of TV spots or print ads that helped elevate the Falcon or Mustang to household name status. Dealerships didn't know how to sell it either, especially when buyers would come in looking for either cheap economy or flashy style. The Fairlane didn't offer either in abundance. It was simply decent. As a result, most 1962 Fairlanes were used as daily drivers, family cars, or company vehicles. They were driven into the ground, traded in, and scrapped. Rust claimed many of them, especially in the northern states. Unlike the Galaxy, the Fairlane didn't inspire loyalty, and unlike the Mustang, It never became a symbol of youth or freedom. It just faded quietly into history. But historians and muscle car fans who look back with a discerning eye know what the 1962 Fairlane really was. A launch pad, a proof of concept. The thin wall casting techniques used on the 221 were cutting edge at the time, and they made it possible to build light, high-revving engines that could still stand up to abuse. That idea would go on to define an entire era of Ford performance, from the GT350 to the Boss 302 to the modern 5.0 Coyote. You could call the 1962 Fairlane the most important, unimportant car Ford ever made. Nobody pinned posters of it to their bedroom walls. Nobody restored them in the 80s. There are no Fairlane-only shows, no tribute editions, no retro revivals. But under that steel hood lay the seed of something great, something that would eventually define the blue oval in drag strips, on road courses, and in driveways across America. Today, a surviving 1962 Fairlane with its original 221 V8 is rarer than a Boss 429. You might see one tucked away in a forgotten garage or wearing a faded for sale sign in a small town field. The 1973 Dodge Charger SE Brougham stands as a symbol of an automotive identity crisis, one that played out in real time as muscle cars faded and disco-era luxury bloat took over. It was a time when insurance premiums were crushing horsepower dreams, emissions regulations were strangling performance, and buyers suddenly wanted plush velour more than pussy traction. The Charger, once Dodge's brash, no-nonsense street fighter, was caught trying to reinvent itself as something smoother, softer, and more upscale. The result? The SE Brougham, a muscle car wrapped in a tuxedo with shag carpeting on the floor and an identity crisis under the hood. When it debuted in the late 60s, the Dodge Charger was a street icon. With its Coke bottle curves, hidden headlights, and booming big blocks, the Charger RT ruled drag strips and drive-ins. But as the 1970s took hold, the golden age of muscle began to dim. Insurance companies were red flagging anything with a 4-barrel carburetor. Gas prices were creeping, and federal mandates meant cars had to get heavier, softer, and safer, whether buyers liked it or not. The Charger had to change, and fast. For 1973, Dodge redesigned the Charger on a slightly larger platform. The body lines were more bulbous, the wheelbase stretched, and the front grille now had a bolder, looped-out look that mimicked the Grand Prix and Monte Carlo, cars that were suddenly outselling muscle coupes by wide margins. And then came the Brougham treatment. The SE Brougham package turned the once rowdy Charger into a velvet-robed cruiser. Think Landau vinyl roof, padded opera windows, wood grain dash, thicker sound insulation, luxury steering wheels, and yes, color-coordinated shag carpet deep enough to lose your keys in. The exterior got extra trim, a padded nose, and just enough chrome to say, I've traded my Hemi dreams for weekend golf. Under the hood, you could still get a 400 or even a 440, but these engines were now choking on smog controls and barely resembled their fire-breathing forebears. And yet, Dodge was hoping to have it both ways, offering the SE Brougham for the grown-up ex-hot rodder while still touting its muscle legacy in brochures. But buyers weren't fooled. Muscle car fans were disappointed. Personal luxury buyers went to Oldsmobile or Pontiac, and the SE Brougham floated in the no-man's land of cars that didn't quite know who they were. A former owner summed it up best. It had power, sure, but it didn't feel like a Charger. The inside looked like a disco lounge, and it wallowed around corners. You'd floor it, and it made noise, but you didn't feel connected to anything. People asked if it was a Monaco. It wasn't a bad car, far from it. The SE Brougham rode smooth, had decent handling for its size, and was arguably better built than some of the leaner, meaner Chargers of the late 60s. But that wasn't the point. It was wearing the wrong badge for the time. The Charger name still evoked racing stripes, straight-line speed, and bullet car chases. The Brougham package evoked shag rugs, rotary phones, and a stack of 8-tracks in the glove box. Dodge quickly realized the misstep. Sales dipped, and by 1975, the Charger line was completely retooled again. this time merging with the Cordoba platform in a last-ditch attempt to ride the personal luxury wave more convincingly. The Charger name would fade entirely by 1978, only to be resurrected decades later in a very different form. Today, finding a 1973 Charger SE Brougham in good condition is rare, not because they're all hiding in barns, but because most were simply used up and forgotten. Nobody saved them like RTs or Daytonas. They were bought by dads who liked a little muscle and a lot of comfort, driven into the ground and sold off when the velour wore thin. Few were preserved and fewer still restored. But in its strange, disco-drenched way, the SE Brougham tells an important story. The moment when muscle cars tried to grow up too fast, put on a tuxedo, and forgot what made them great. It's not a legend, but it's a lesson. And for the handful of survivors still rumbling along in their shag-carpeted glory, it's a reminder of a time when Detroit didn't quite know what the future looked like, so they tried everything at once. The 1960 Edsel Ranger, tragically, was more of a footnote than a fitting tribute to what was once an ambitious and overhyped brand. The tale of the Edsel is well known, its grand entrance and catastrophic fall. However, the Ranger, as the final gasp of the Edsel brand, is often overlooked. The 1960 model, perhaps, could have been the one that saved it, but by then it was far too little, far too late. In 1957, the launch of the Edsel was hailed as one of the most audacious attempts in automotive history. Ford poured millions of dollars into creating a new brand, one designed to fill a gap in their lineup between the mainstream Ford models and the luxury-level Mercury. The hype surrounding Edsel was enormous. Ford promoted it as a car that would revolutionize the automotive industry, equipped with cutting-edge technology, stylish design, and a host of features never before seen on cars at this price point. From the moment the car hit the market, however, things went wrong. The first Edsels, particularly the 1958 models, were marred by questionable design choices. The infamous horse collar grille, which became a symbol of Edsel's failure, was widely criticized. The cars were overstyled, too flashy, and didn't align with consumer expectations. To make matters worse, the push-button transmission, which was meant to be innovative, ended up confusing drivers and contributing to the car's mechanical issues. The combination of these factors led to disastrous sales, and by 1959, Edsel was all but dead. The 1960 Edsel Ranger, then, was an attempt to make amends. Ford decided to scale back on the radical design features of the previous Edsels, opting instead for a more conservative look. The horse collar grille was gone, replaced by a more traditional two-bar grille. The sleek, futuristic tail fins of earlier models were toned down. It was now simply a car, with the goal being to appeal to mainstream buyers without the outlandish flair that had turned consumers off in the first place. But Ford's efforts to salvage the brand fell flat. By the time the 1960 Ranger arrived, Edsel had already been tainted by its failure. The name had become a punchline. Consumers saw the name Edsel and immediately thought of the failed experiment, no matter how much Ford tried to turn things around. The car was essentially a Ford Galaxy in a different wrapper, with no major differences other than a few cosmetic touches. The Edsel name was now so toxic that even the car's quality, which was respectable, couldn't save it from being ignored. Only 846 units of the 1960 Edsel Ranger were produced, and its sales were abysmal. The Ranger was the final Edsel model to ever roll off the production line, and it marked the end of a very expensive mistake for Ford. The brand was officially dead. The model was barely noticed by consumers, and most dealers struggled to even sell the cars once they arrived in showrooms. In fact, Ford dealers had a hard time even explaining the car to customers. Many didn't even realize it was an Edsel. Ironically, the 1960 Ranger might have been the best car Edsel ever made. It was simple and stylish, a far cry from the garish designs that had characterized the brand's first years. With a 292 cubic inch V8 engine producing up to 210 horsepower, it offered decent power for the time, though nothing that would stand out in the crowded full-size sedan market. The car featured a clean, uncluttered interior and a solid, if unremarkable, ride. It was a car that would have fit well into Ford's lineup, but unfortunately it was saddled with the stigma of being an Edsel. The car's failure, however, wasn't entirely due to its lack of appeal, It was also a reflection of the public's perception of the Edsel brand at the time. By 1960, Ford had made the decision to cut its losses. The damage to the Edsel name had been done, and the public was uninterested in even considering a car with such a problematic history. The Ranger, a decent car in its own right, simply couldn't overcome the baggage of the nameplate it carried. Interestingly, those who managed to get their hands on a 1960 Ranger often had positive things to say about it. Some owners remember the car as solid, if somewhat plain, and a far cry from the earlier Edsels. One Edsel enthusiast fondly recalled, "It wasn't a flashy car, but it was a good one. The engine was solid, the ride was nice, and it looked good on the road." By 1960, they had finally figured it out. Too bad nobody cared. This sentiment is shared by a few who recognize that, had it been branded under the Ford or Mercury name, it might have been more successful. Today, finding a 1960 Edsel Ranger is akin to discovering a hidden gem buried beneath layers of automotive history. While many of the cars from the Edsel line are forgotten or sitting in junkyards, the Ranger, despite its low production numbers, is not entirely gone. The 1959 Chrysler Saratoga was a vehicle ahead of its time. One of those rare models that foreshadowed the convergence of performance and luxury long before the personal luxury segment would emerge as a dominant force in the American automotive landscape. Positioned between the mid-range Windsor and the high-end New Yorker, the Saratoga was a curious model, neither fully a luxury car nor a muscle car, but offering a combination of both that was unusual for its era. It was a blend of refinement and raw power, wrapped in an elegant, stylish body. Yet, despite all its attributes, it never fully found its niche in the market and quietly disappeared after Chrysler dropped it in the early 1960s. At its core, the Saratoga was an embodiment of Chrysler's ambition to offer something more than just another full-size sedan. It was powerful, sleek, and possessed a level of sophistication that set it apart from many other full-size cars of its time. Its power came from Chrysler's iconic Hemi engine, the 383 cubic-inch V8, a powerhouse that pushed out 305 horsepower. This wasn't the sort of engine you'd typically find in a mid-tier sedan, and it gave the Saratoga a unique character. Imagine a luxury sedan capable of delivering the kind of performance that could give a muscle car a run for its money. It wasn't common in 1959 to see such a blend of luxury and muscle, but Chrysler had managed to put it all together with the Saratoga. One of the defining features of the Saratoga was its exterior design. The sleek, refined styling of the body exuded the kind of elegance you'd expect from a car that sat near the top of Chrysler's lineup. The long, sweeping lines, the chrome accents, and the signature tail fins of the late 50s made the Saratoga look the part of a luxury vehicle. But under that polished exterior was a heart that was anything but ordinary. When you popped the hood, you were greeted by that Hemi engine, which had gained a legendary status in automotive circles. It was a car that wasn't simply about luxury. This was a car that could actually perform. Despite its potential, the Saratoga struggled to carve out a distinct identity in the crowded automotive marketplace. Chrysler was already offering the more affordable Windsor and the higher-end New Yorker, and the Saratoga's positioning between these two models left it in a somewhat awkward spot. It wasn't quite a full-blown luxury car, and it wasn't marketed as a performance car either, so it didn't fit neatly into either of those categories. As the 1960s began, Chrysler, like many automakers, began to focus more on streamlining its lineup and shifting towards the growing demand for more specialized vehicles. The Saratoga, with its performance-oriented luxury nature, didn't quite mesh with the changing tides of the automotive market, and production was discontinued after just a few years. For all its shortcomings in terms of market positioning, the Saratoga was in many ways ahead of its time. It was a precursor to what would eventually become the personal luxury and muscle car markets. In the early 60s, the idea of a luxury car with a high-performance engine would become more of a mainstream concept, with models like the Pontiac GTO, Buick Riviera, and Ford Thunderbird leading the way. But in 1959, the Saratoga was a quiet trailblazer, sitting between two segments that were destined to become much more defined in the years to come. Today, the Chrysler Saratoga is largely forgotten by mainstream car enthusiasts, but for those who appreciate the intersection of luxury and performance, it's a gem of a car. Chrysler collectors, especially those who specialize in the more obscure models, often speak of the Saratoga as a sleeper, a car that was much more than it appeared. As one Chrysler enthusiast put it, Saratogas are sleepers. Most people think they're just old sedans. Then you pop the hood and see that 383 breathing fire. That's the allure of the Saratoga. It's a car that doesn't immediately give away its potential. Its understated elegance, combined with the brute force of the Hemi engine, makes it a car that surprises and delights anyone who knows what to look for. Finding a Saratoga today is a rare treat. Due to its relatively short production run and its failure to capture the attention of the masses, many were either scrapped or left to rust away in junkyards. However, those that remain are prized by collectors who recognize the Saratoga as a rare example of early muscle and luxury. There's a certain charm to seeing a Saratoga on the road today, a vehicle that quietly carried the legacy of both Chrysler's luxury offerings and its performance potential, yet never quite received the recognition it deserved. In a way, the Saratoga's fate mirrors that of many of the other forgotten muscle and luxury cars of the late 50s and early 60s. The 1968 AMC Rebel SST 390 was a muscle car that could have been, but it was overshadowed by more iconic names in the muscle car world, leaving it as one of AMC's forgotten early attempts at performance glory. In a time when American muscle cars were defined by the likes of the Mustang, Camaro, and Charger, AMC's Rebel SST 390 got lost in the shuffle despite its impressive credentials. It had the power, it had the performance, but the market simply wasn't ready to embrace an AMC muscle car in 1960. At the heart of the Rebel SST 390 was AMC's 390 cubic inch V8 engine, which produced a respectable 325 horsepower. This wasn't just another mid-size sedan. This was a car that could haul, with the kind of grunt that was more akin to the muscle cars of the day. The Rebel SST, sitting atop AMC's Rebel lineup, was far from the typical family sedan. With its big block V8, it was a car that could go toe-to-toe with other mid-size muscle cars of the era. But its understated styling and the less glamorous AMC badge meant that it never quite garnered the same level of attention as its more famous counterparts. The Rebel SST 390's performance was more than capable, with 0-60 mph times that could rival other muscle cars of the day. Its big block engine, combined with AMC's solid suspension setup, made it an unexpectedly powerful and fun car to drive. But the Rebel didn't have the same wow factor as the AMX or Javelin, which were designed specifically to tap into the growing muscle car market. The Rebel SST, on the other hand, was caught in an identity crisis. It was a car that didn't quite fit into AMC's performance-oriented lineup, yet it wasn't just another family sedan either. AMC, a company known for its unconventional approach, never fully embraced the Rebel SST as a true muscle car. The Rebel name was steeped in history, but was more closely associated with the conservative sedans. So when the SST 390 appeared, it was an oddball, a muscle car dressed up as a family-friendly car. While the likes of the Mustang and Chevelle were turning heads with their bold, aggressive styling, the Rebel SST was more subdued. Its clean lines and relatively reserved looks didn't scream muscle. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like just another family car, and that's exactly how most people saw it. Despite the performance capabilities, the SST 390 never received the respect it deserved. AMC's image as a niche brand at the time didn't help its cause. Buyers, many of whom were already loyal to other big-name muscle car manufacturers, didn't give the Rebel SST a second look. The car was overshadowed by models that were more well-known for performance and sporty aesthetics, like the AMX and the Javelin, both of which were designed with muscle car enthusiasts in mind. And as the years went by, the Rebel name began to fade. By 1970, AMC had all but abandoned the Rebel line, and the SST badge was relegated to history. The Javelin and AMX would go on to become the most iconic of AMC's performance cars. But the Rebel SST 390 never achieved the same level of recognition. Today, it remains one of the forgotten muscle cars from the late 60s, overshadowed by more well-known names and often overlooked by collectors. For those who remember the Rebel SST 390, however, it remains a piece of muscle car history. AMC diehards will often talk about it with a mix of nostalgia and reverence. One longtime fan recalled, "People only talk about the AMX, but the Rebel 390 could haul. It just looked like your uncle's commuter car. People had no idea what it could do until you floored it." There's a certain charm to the Rebel SST 390, a car that didn't have the flashy styling of a Mustang, but could still leave you grinning when you punched the gas. It was a sleeper, hiding its muscle under the guise of a family sedan. Today, finding a Rebel SST 390 is a rarity. Many were scrapped or lost to time, and those that remain are prized by collectors who appreciate the underdog nature of the car. While it may not have achieved the fame of other muscle cars, the Rebel SST 390 still holds a special place in the hearts of AMC fans and muscle car enthusiasts who recognize it for what it truly was, a powerful, overlooked gem of its time. The 1970 Chevrolet Kingswood Estate 454 was one of those rare muscle car curiosities that seemed almost too good to be true, but somehow slipped under the radar. At a time when muscle cars were the rage and the market was flooded with powerful, performance-oriented vehicles, Chevrolet gave the Kingswood Estate a full-size station wagon, the same 454 LS5 engine that was found in the high-performance Chevelle SS. It was an audacious move, combining the utilitarian charm of a family wagon with the raw power of one of the era's most fearsome big-block V8s. But it went mostly unnoticed. To put it simply, the Kingswood Estate 454 was the kind of car that defied expectations. Imagine this, a full-size station wagon that could carry a family of 8 and all their luggage for a road trip, yet still be capable of delivering bone-jarring acceleration at a stoplight. It had the muscle of a Chevelle SMS, but it was wrapped up in the body of a family car with wood paneling on the sides and all the comforts that a station wagon of the time was expected to offer. This was a muscle wagon in every sense of the word, capable of towing boats, hauling furniture, and most impressively, leaving performance cars in the dust. But in classic sleeper fashion, Chevrolet didn't make a big deal out of it. There was no flashy advertising campaign, no TV spots that proudly touted the Kingswood 454's muscle. Instead, it was just another trim option, buried in the options list. As a result, very few buyers actually opted for the 454 engine in the Kingswood Estate. Most buyers of the Kingswood, a station wagon that epitomized family transportation, were likely not looking for a high-performance powertrain. They were more concerned with space, comfort, and practicality, not realizing they could have had the best of both worlds. The Kingswood Estate 454's LS5 engine packed a potent 360 horsepower, making it capable of accelerating with the best of them, even with its hefty size and weight. With a 0-60 mph time that could rival smaller muscle cars, this was no ordinary grocery getter. It was a brute in disguise, luxurious, comfortable, and capable of effortlessly moving a full family while also delivering the kind of raw power that made other drivers do a double take. The sheer idea of a family wagon with the heart of a muscle car seems absurd today, but in 1970, it was exactly what Chevrolet offered. For those lucky enough to have owned one, the Kingswood 454 was a revelation. Mine could tow a boat, carry 8 people, and smoke tires at a stoplight, recalled one enthusiastic owner. What more do you need? It was a vehicle that provided the ultimate flexibility, whether it was hauling the family on a weekend trip or leaving muscle cars behind at a stoplight. It was a perfect mix of performance and practicality, and yet it was a performance car that almost no one recognized as such. Unfortunately, the Kingswood Estate 454 didn't last long. Like many muscle cars of the era, it fell victim to the changing automotive landscape. Emissions regulations, rising insurance premiums, and the growing fuel crisis meant that muscle cars, especially ones like the Kingswood that prioritized power over efficiency, were quickly on the decline. By the mid-1970s, full-size wagons with big block engines were simply not what buyers wanted anymore, and Chevy dropped the 454 option from the Kingswood lineup. Today, very few 1970 Kingswood Estate 454s remain, and finding one is a rarity. For those who do manage to track one down, it's often in a state of neglect or disrepair, as these cars were used hard and not seen as valuable collector's items back in the day. It's the kind of forgotten muscle car that slips through the cracks of history, overshadowed by the more iconic muscle cars of the era. Yet, for wagon enthusiasts and muscle car aficionados, the Kingswood Estate 454 remains an overlooked gem, proof that sometimes the best sleepers are the ones that never got the recognition they deserved. The muscle wagon that could do it all, yet went largely unnoticed, is a symbol of automotive misdirection and missed potential. But for those few who remember, it's one of those rare finds that perfectly captures the unique charm of a time when cars could be practical, powerful, and a whole lot of fun. The 1966 Dodge Coronet Deluxe two-door post occupies a truly unique space in the annals of muscle car history. It's a vehicle that many enthusiasts might not recognize at first glance, especially in the context of muscle car giants like the Charger or the Roadrunner. The Coronet Deluxe two-door post wasn't designed to be flashy or luxurious. It wasn't built for cruising or showrooms, nor did it have the cushy amenities that would attract your typical car buyer. Instead, Dodge created this version as the ultimate blank canvas for racers, unassuming, stripped down, and equipped with the kind of raw power that would make it a menace on any drag strip. For those who followed the performance trends of the 1960s, the Coronet was a well-established model. However, in 1990, Dodge introduced a version of the Coronet that was so minimalistic it would have made the average muscle car enthusiast do a double take. The Deluxe two-door post was a car that had barely any frills to speak of. It did not have power windows, no fancy upholstery, no chrome embellishments, no power steering, or even a radio. All it had was an unadorned steel body, basic interior, and most importantly, a heart that was waiting to be unleashed. And what a heart it was. Dodge gave buyers a choice of engines, but the star of the show was the 426 Hemi V8, a beast of an engine that had already proven itself in NASCAR. By this point in automotive history, the Hemi was a legend in the making. This was the same engine that had won countless races and left a trail of tire smoke wherever it went. Yet this wasn't a car for the average Joe. It was a racer's dream, a car with enough power to bring even the most experienced drag racer to their knees. But here's the kicker. Dodge didn't advertise the Coronet Deluxe two-door post as a muscle car. It wasn't marketed as the next big thing or designed to be a part of the performance car culture that was exploding at the time. Instead, it was built with a purpose, to be a race car in disguise. Dodge's strategy was simple. Sell this stripped-down version to enthusiasts who knew what it was capable of and let them turn it into something fierce. There were no flashy badges or garish spoilers to give it away. It was a plain Jane workhorse car that, when equipped with the Hemi, became a wolf in sheep's clothing. For drag racers, the Coronet Deluxe two-door post was the perfect base car. No frills, no distractions, just a clean slate for building the ultimate race machine. Mechanics and racers loved the simplicity. It was easy to modify and tune for maximum performance. The car's lightweight body and beefy engine made it a perfect match for drag racing. The fact that Dodge didn't offer power steering or any sort of luxury options only made it more appealing to those who knew how to handle a car like this. However, there was a reason why Dodge didn't have to sell the Coronet Deluxe two-door post with any special fanfare or high-pressure tactics. These cars weren't meant for the average consumer. They were aimed at the hardcore racing crowd, the ones who knew exactly what they were buying. And that crowd knew what they wanted: big power, minimal weight, and no distractions. Dodge didn't need to advertise that they were offering a Hemi-powered sleeper. The word got around fast among racers. People only talk about the AMX, but the Rebel 390 could haul. It just looked like your uncle's commuter, said one AMC diehard, commenting on another muscle car that suffered a similar fate. The Rebel SST 390, like the Coronet, had the muscle but the wrong image to become a collector's darling. Similarly, the 1966 Dodge Coronet Deluxe two-door post was a sleeper, one that could rip through the quarter mile with ease, but went unnoticed by the general public. As time passed, it became just another forgotten car, a victim of the very thing that made it special, its stealthy, no-frills design. And as time marched on, the Coronet's status as a sleeper was what doomed it. These cars were bought by racers who immediately started tearing them apart and transforming them into track machines. Whether it was the Hemi engine, the suspension, or the weight-saving measures, racers didn't care about preserving the car as it was. They cared about making it faster, more powerful, and more capable. Dodge didn't keep production records for the Coronet Deluxe two-door post, so it's difficult to estimate how many were sold. But whatever the number was, it was certainly small, and even smaller is the number of these cars that managed to survive. The sad reality is that most of these cars didn't last long. Many were raced hard and put away wet, ending their lives in junkyards, demolished by wrecks, or simply stripped for parts. There wasn't much in the way of a collector's market for them in the 1970s and 1980s. After all, it was just a plain-looking car that didn't scream muscle, and by then the GTO, the Charger. The 1958 DeSoto FireSweep stands as a striking reminder of a brand that tried to capture the tail end of an era that had already passed. Introduced as part of DeSoto's desperate push to stay relevant in the automotive market, the FireSweep was an ambitious attempt to create a stylish and affordable car that still carried the luxury and boldness the DeSoto name was once known for. But by the time this car hit the streets, DeSoto was already in serious decline, and the FireSweep's life would be short and full of struggles. The DeSoto brand, which had once been a strong contender in the American automotive market, was beginning to show cracks in the late 1950s. As the automotive landscape began to shift with changing tastes and the rise of newer models, DeSoto couldn't keep up. The FireSweep, introduced in 1958, was supposed to be a key model in the DeSoto lineup, designed to offer a balance of luxury and affordability to attract a broader range of buyers. It was based on the Chrysler's lower-tier Dodge platform, but with more luxury-oriented features and styling. Its design was full of mid-century flair, with chrome embellishments, sweeping fins, and an overall visual appeal that screamed 1950s style. But under that glitzy surface was a car that was already suffering from the effects of the company's decline. DeSoto was struggling to find its place in an ever-changing market where buyers were becoming more focused on practical cars rather than the flashy, fin designs that had once dominated the automotive world. The FireSweep was a bit of a last-ditch effort by DeSoto to make a name for itself in the competitive automotive world. While the car looked good on paper, with its large V8 engine and spacious interior, it couldn't stand up to the long-term reliability that buyers were beginning to demand. Sales numbers reflected the troubles DeSoto was facing, with only around 18,000 FireSweeps produced in 1958. The car's poor reception wasn't just a result of its fading brand, it also suffered from a number of mechanical and design issues. Despite its flashy appearance, the FireSweep quickly became known for its rust problems and early mechanical failures. The car's rust issues were especially noticeable as the vehicle aged, with many owners reporting significant decay by just the third year of ownership. Rusted frames and deteriorating components quickly soured what was once an exciting new model. For some owners, this car went from a source of pride to a source of frustration as it failed to live up to its initial promise. As one owner shared in a reflection, "It looked flashy but aged fast. Mine had rust issues by year 3. Still, people always asked what it was." There's something painfully ironic in this statement. The FireSweep did turn heads when it was new, with its striking fins and chromed-out details that embodied the best of 1950s automotive design. It was the kind of car that made a statement. But as time wore on, the appeal began to fade. What was once a standout on the road quickly became an old, faded symbol of a brand in decline, outpaced by its competitors and plagued by its own shortcomings. The demise of the FireSweep mirrored the larger fate of the DeSoto brand itself. Despite the car's promising looks and the luxury positioning DeSoto tried to push, the company was already on its way out. By 1961, Chrysler made the decision to discontinue DeSoto entirely. The brand, which had once been a strong competitor to the likes of Chevrolet, Ford, and Buick, could no longer sustain itself in the rapidly changing automotive world as well. The FireSweep, like other DeSoto models, became a footnote in automotive history, overshadowed by the more popular and successful vehicles from other brands. This short-lived chapter in the story of DeSoto might have been forgotten entirely had it not been for the rare few FireSweeps that have survived into the present day. For car collectors and classic car enthusiasts, the DeSoto FireSweep has become a curiosity, a car that stands as a symbol of an era that was quickly fading, as well as a symbol of a company that couldn't keep up with the changing times. It's a rare survivor from a brand that left the market far too early, carrying with it a strange sense of nostalgia and an aura of lost potential. What's fascinating about the FireSweep today is that it's not just a relic of a time when excess and flamboyance ruled the automotive landscape, but also a reminder of how quickly things can change in the car industry. In 1958, when the FireSweep debuted, the American car market was still in love with big, bold designs, chrome accents, and powerful engines. Yet just a few years later, the market would change dramatically. The very traits that made the FireSweep desirable, its flashy fins, its big engine, its sense of style, would become liabilities in an era when consumers began to crave smaller, more practical cars. The 1971 Lincoln Continental Mark III Cartier Edition is a fascinating and somewhat forgotten part of American automotive history, an early experiment in the fusion of high-end designer branding with automobiles. Before designer editions became a staple in the automotive world, this rare trim package was Lincoln's bold attempt to elevate their luxury car to an even higher level by associating it with the prestigious French jewelry brand Cartier. It was a move that seemed ahead of its time, but ultimately didn't achieve the kind of success that Lincoln had hoped for, yet stands as a symbol of an era of automotive experimentation. At the heart of the 1971 Mark III was already a truly luxurious vehicle. The Mark III was part of Lincoln's full-size luxury coupe lineup and was built to compete with the likes of the Cadillac Eldorado and the Chrysler Imperial. With its smooth lines, sweeping roofline, and aggressive stance, the Mark III was a car that exuded power, refinement, and wealth. Under the hood, it was powered by a 460 cubic inch V8 engine, which provided ample power and performance to match its ostentatious appearance. Inside, the Mark III boasted a plush leather interior, climate control, and all the trappings of a top-tier luxury automobile. But despite its opulence, Lincoln sought to set itself apart with the Cartier Edition, targeting buyers who wanted something even more extravagant, who sought a level of luxury that no one else had. The Cartier Edition featured distinctive upgrades that took the luxury to another level. The interior of the car was completely reworked with rich, suede upholstery on the seats that enveloped passengers in comfort. Every inch of the cabin was designed to be as lavish as possible, featuring custom wood trim and exclusive Cartier badging. The steering wheel, the dashboard, and even the floor mats received a premium treatment. But the Cartier Edition didn't just stop at interior refinement. It also had a unique exterior design. The car was available in special paint colors and featured additional badging, including a prominent Cartier emblem that adorned both the interior and exterior of the car. It was a statement, making clear that this was not just any Mark III. It was a special edition meant for those who wanted their car to be more than just a luxury vehicle, but a symbol of their personal opulence. However, the Cartier Edition struggled to find an audience in the early 70s. In 1971, the world was changing. The long, glitzy luxury cars of the late 60s and early 70s were starting to look like relics of a past era. The social and cultural climate was shifting, and the gaudy, over-the-top luxury of cars like the Cartier Edition wasn't resonating with a new generation of car buyers. Despite Lincoln's ambitious vision, many customers didn't understand or appreciate the idea of associating a car with a luxury brand like Cartier. Luxury cars of the time were still mostly about the car itself, not the brand name affiliations that were beginning to rise in prominence. While designer collaborations were already gaining traction in other industries, particularly fashion, the idea of a designer automobile was still foreign to many consumers. The Cartier Edition, therefore, failed to catch on with the public. Sales were disappointingly low, and many buyers opted for the standard Mark III, which offered a similar level of luxury without the excess and boldness of the Cartier branding. It wasn't that the Cartier Edition was poorly made, it was a magnificent car, but it was simply too extravagant for a market that was becoming increasingly disinterested in such excess. As one owner later reflected, Mine had suede seats and Cartier logos everywhere. Too much for the time, I guess. People thought I was showing off. Despite this, the Cartier edition had a lasting impact on the luxury car market, albeit in a more indirect way. The idea of creating a luxury car in partnership with a designer brand didn't gain widespread traction until later in the decade and into the 1980s, when cars like the Cadillac Seville and various Mercedes-Benz models began collaborating with fashion and jewelry houses for special editions. But in 1971, it was an idea that felt too ahead of its time, and the Cartier edition was quietly discontinued after just a single year of production. Today, the 1971 Lincoln Continental Mark III Cartier edition is a rare and highly collectible vehicle. Due to its low production numbers, the car is virtually impossible to find, and when one does surface, it commands a premium price. Collectors of vintage luxury cars and automotive enthusiasts alike look at the Cartier edition as a true oddity, an example of what could have been had it found the right audience. For some, it represents a time when the boundaries between fashion and automobiles were just beginning to blur, a time when car manufacturers were willing to take big risks to stay relevant. The 1957 Nash Rambler Rebel stands as one of the most overlooked and underrated muscle cars in automotive history, predating the muscle car revolution by nearly a decade. In a world where the term muscle car is often synonymous with names like GTO, Chevelle, and Mustang, it's easy to forget that the roots of this performance craze began with unconventional choices and unexpected entries, like the Rambler Rebel. In 1957, AMC American Motors Corporation was not the powerhouse it would later become with models like the AMX and Javelin, but rather a smaller player in the auto industry. At the time, Nash was still working to maintain its footing in the market, and in an era dominated by full-size sedans and larger vehicles, it made a bold decision that would go largely unnoticed. The Rebel was a mid-sized sedan that came equipped with a powerful 327 cubic inch V8 engine, the same engine used in AMC's larger, more luxurious models. But AMC's real trick was dropping this engine into a car that was considerably lighter than its full-size counterparts. This combination of lightweight design and big block power allowed the Rambler Rebel to achieve remarkable performance numbers. It could hit 60 mph in under 8 seconds, an impressive feat for the era, especially considering that many other cars of the time struggled to reach that speed in twice the time. With 255 horsepower under the hood, the Rebel was a sleeper, offering the kind of performance that would have been expected from more established performance brands, but from a company better known for its economical family cars. However, despite its impressive performance, the Rebel didn't catch on with the public. The reason was partly due to the brand's image. Nash, which later became part of AMC, wasn't known for building performance cars, and consumers simply couldn't wrap their heads around the idea of a Rambler, a name long associated with conservative family sedans, offering a car with muscle car power. Additionally, the design of the Rebel wasn't particularly eye-catching. It was, after all, just a slightly sportier version of the brand's regular sedans. There were no flashy details, no bold styling cues, no aggressive badging that would have signified it as a performance car to the untrained eye. It looked like a regular family car, but packed under its hood was the heart of a beast. AMC had hoped that the Rebel would help draw attention to its brand in an era that was quickly gravitating towards speed and performance. But despite the car's capabilities, the muscle car movement had not yet fully taken hold. Buyers weren't yet looking for small, lightweight cars with big powertrains. The muscle car era was still in its infancy, and even the Chevrolet Corvette, which had already established itself as a performance icon, wasn't truly recognized as a part of the muscle car movement until years later. Ultimately, the 1957 Nash Rambler Rebel disappeared after just 1 year of production. It was an unfortunate casualty of timing. Had it been released a few years later, when the muscle car craze had fully taken root, the Rebel might have had the chance to carve out its own niche in automotive history. But as it stood, it was ahead of its time, a forgotten pioneer in a movement that would later be defined by a completely different set of brands and models. AMC would go on to embrace muscle cars with the AMX, Javelin, and other performance models. But the Rambler Rebel, the original factory muscle car, would never receive the recognition it deserved. For those who were lucky enough to own one, the Rebel was a car that could surprise. As One Speed Junkie reflected, that Rebel was scary fast for the 50s, but nobody thought a Rambler could run like that. And yet, it was one of the earliest examples of the hidden potential in what would become the muscle car genre. Today, the Rambler Rebel is a rare sight on the road, and finding one in good condition is a challenge. But those who do get a chance to experience it will likely agree that this unassuming mid-size sedan had more power and performance than it was ever given credit for. It truly was the first factory muscle car, just one that didn't get the chance to shine in the spotlight. The Rebel's brief existence serves as a reminder of the often forgotten vehicles that laid the groundwork for entire automotive movements, vehicles that were too ahead of their time or simply too far out of the mainstream to gain the recognition they deserved. The Rambler Rebel, with its potent engine and surprising performance, stands as an early, rare, and largely forgotten part of muscle car history. The 1976 Chevrolet Chevelle Laguna Type S3 was one of the last true performance variants of the iconic Chevelle nameplate before it was retired. By the mid-70s, muscle cars were beginning to fall out of favor, victims of rising insurance premiums, stricter emissions regulations, and the shifting tastes of the American consumer. But the Laguna S3 was a final, bold attempt to keep the performance spirit alive in a market that was rapidly changing. It was a last hurrah for a car that had once symbolized the muscle car era. The Laguna S3 had a distinctive aerodynamic front end that was inspired by NASCAR, where the Chevelle had found some success during the 1970s. Chevrolet had been keen to link the street version of the car to its performance pedigree on the track. The front end was more streamlined than the traditional Chevelle design, making it stand out from its more conventional counterparts in the lineup. It was a performance-oriented car, blending muscle with some of the visual cues of race car design, and Chevrolet marketed it as such. Under the hood, buyers had the option of either a 400 cubic inch or a 454 cubic inch V8 engine, making it a powerful ride with plenty of torque and muscle car characteristics. The 454 was a beast, delivering more than 230 horsepower and pushing the Laguna S3 to some serious speeds. It was a formidable option for those who wanted a combination of classic American muscle and a touch of racetrack inspiration, especially considering its performance potential on the track. Despite these strong attributes, the Chevelle Laguna S3 came at a time when the automotive world was shifting. The muscle car boom of the 60s and early 70s had waned, and the new demands of fuel efficiency, lower emissions, and consumer safety regulations began to dominate the automotive landscape. The performance potential of cars like the Laguna was being stifled by increasingly strict government regulations, leading to the downfall of the muscle car era. In addition, consumer tastes had also shifted. The muscle car, once a symbol of freedom and raw power, was now associated with gas guzzlers and skyrocketing insurance premiums. The Laguna S3, despite its racing pedigree and performance options, struggled to capture the same attention as its muscle car predecessors. Buyers were looking for something different, and the Chevelle's role as a performance icon began to fade. Despite its limitations in terms of mainstream success, the Laguna S3 did find its place on the racetrack. Cale Yarborough, one of NASCAR's great drivers, drove a Laguna in the mid-70s, and the car found some success on the circuit. The connection between the street version and NASCAR was clear, but in a world increasingly dominated by more fuel-efficient and regulated vehicles, it wasn't enough to ensure the Laguna's survival in the consumer market. For those who owned one, the experience was a unique one. As one NASCAR fan recalled, Cale Yarborough drove one. Mine looked like his, and people just scratched their heads at stoplights. The Laguna S3 was a car that turned heads for all the wrong reasons. It looked like something out of a race, but on the street, it was a bit of an oddity. Most people didn't quite understand what it was. It wasn't quite a muscle car, nor was it a traditional luxury car. Its unique design and performance options made it a standout, but that very distinctiveness led to confusion on the road. By 1907, the Chevelle Laguna Type S3 was history, and the Chevelle name was quietly retired by 1978. The Laguna was an unfortunate casualty of a rapidly changing automotive landscape. It represented the final performance variant of a car that had been a mainstay of the muscle car era. Though it had the raw power and racing inspiration, it was a car out of time, too advanced in its performance for an era that no longer embraced the old-school muscle mentality. Today, the 1976 Chevrolet Chevelle Laguna Type S3 is a rare sight on the roads. Many were scrapped or left to rust away, and only a few are still in the hands of collectors and enthusiasts who appreciate its unique place in automotive history. For those who are lucky enough to see one, it stands as a reminder of a bygone era when muscle cars and NASCAR-inspired designs ruled the road, and a final nod to a performance spirit that was on the brink of extinction.